In this video, I'm going to explain why when we play the piano, we don't want each finger to go on a separate key. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So you saw the thumbnail, you read the title right, and you're probably wondering, wait a second, what is he talking about here? Well, I hope that I piqued your interest because I think that this is one of the most important concepts that anyone can learn when it comes to playing the piano. Now, if you're a subscriber and you've been around for a while, you may have heard me say that a lot and you're thinking, okay, he says that about literally everything. But there's so many little ideas that I think are so important, but they seem so inconsequential. So my goal in this video is to convince you that I'm right and that this is truly important. So we're going to talk about 3 reasons why this concept is important, and I'm going to demonstrate with a scale, arpeggio, and then a piece of music so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. And then I'm going to invite you to experiment at home with what I'm talking about, because this is probably the best way of convincing you that I'm not actually crazy and maybe I do know what I'm talking about. So the first reason why it is important to not have each finger go on a separate key is that reaching side to side with a finger limits mobility. Now, in order to understand this, we have to think about how the fingers move. Okay, the fingers have 2 basic primary movements. They move up and down from this main knuckle joint, right? Okay, and then they can move side to side. Okay, and what you'll notice is that your index finger can move side to side pretty well, but the rest of your fingers don't really move side to side super well. It's awkward, it's cumbersome, okay? Now, the second thing that we have to understand is that when our fingers are spread apart, we have sort of opposing muscles that then will work against each other. When we spread our fingers apart like so, what happens is that the muscles that move our fingers up and down are somewhat impinged in their activity. So they can move the fingers up and down, but what you'll notice is it's a little bit more difficult, okay? So if we think about a position that's pretty common for beginners, or especially when teachers first teach their students to do beginning improvisation at the keyboard, we go to this pentatonic position on the black keys. And I've seen this so many times in videos, they say, okay, put each finger on a separate key and then play like this, okay? You'll notice that there's these little gaps in between my fingers, in between certain fingers more than others. Try this for me for a minute. Just relax your hands so your fingers are all close together and wiggle them up and down. Easy peasy. Now, spread them apart even just that much and move them up and down. Easy? Sure, okay? There's someone watching that's gonna be, oh, that's ridiculous, that's still easy. Yeah, totally. But do you notice that little bit of, it's just not quite as easy. It's a little bit harder, okay? And that's what I want to focus on here. When we spread the fingers apart, it limits our mobility, okay? And it limits the amount of speed and accuracy and smoothness that our fingers can move up and down. If you spread your fingers a bit more and try to wiggle them, you'll go, yep, I know what he's talking about, okay? Now, this leads into number 2, which is that playing with the fingers spread, like so, encourages individual digit thinking. And what I mean by that is, if I spread my fingers like so, immediately it makes me think finger 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay? Versus if I play like this, and my hand is sort of almost centered on that G flat, where my thumb is, because that's the note that I'm playing. And then if I'm going to play this note, then my hand sort of centers over here. See how this sort of changes from individual digit thinking, where it's causing me to focus in on this finger and sort of isolate that finger and isolate my thumb. And it sort of changes. It makes me think of more of my hand as one sort of unit, my fingers, hand, and arm, and so they move together. Which brings us to number 3, which is that it makes it harder to play with lots of motion because there's already this underlying element of stiffness in the hand and the arm. And you'll notice this if you play like this. It's a little bit harder to move, to just play the fingers, than if I just sort of shift across the keyboard like so. And this is really the key to what we're talking about here, okay? So rather than putting each finger on a separate key, I want to focus on one note at a time, and I want to think about walking across the keyboard, okay? So we can look at this with an arpeggio, okay? There's not necessarily a problem with spreading the hand a little bit, but we want to limit that as much as we can. So if I'm going to play an arpeggio, I'm sort of shifting across. Notice how I shift across here, and then I'm just shifting up and down the keyboard, like so. Same thing in a scale, which you might think matters even less because the notes are so close together. But just look at this for a second. So here's the difference. Each finger is on a separate key, and I'm going to play like so. Now you can't see this exactly, but my thumb is about here, but it needs to be over here. And so I have to twist to get to that note. But watch what happens when I focus on one note at a time and I just shift across the keys. It's a beautiful thing. I'm here and I shift to here. See that? And I shift to here. Now my thumb is literally right there. It's right there. And I just go there. There's no stretching, there's no pulling, there's no twisting. It's just so easy, okay? Now, the piece of repertoire that I chose to sort of demonstrate this is the Limpid Stream by Burgmüller, and this is from his Opus 100, number 7 in the set. And I'm just going to play a little bit so you can kind of see what I'm doing here. Okay, so basically you can see we have these little triplet things where we have these broken chords moving up and down the keyboard. What you'll notice is that I'm not afraid for my hand to be slightly opened, okay? So I'm not exactly playing like this, okay? So we don't want to over-exaggerate this concept. But what you'll notice is I'm doing this, and I'm shifting across. I'm not trying to reach too much with my fingers, okay? I'm not placing each one over a note. See how much more stiff and angular that is, okay? Especially when we have this moving up the keyboard. Okay, that was a weird fingering, but it's actually really hard for me to just hold my hand still and place all my fingers. It just looks much more tense and angular and sort of awkward, okay? So when I do this, see how, like, for instance, this last one, I shift up here, and then these fingers release, and I'm just right here. And even from here to here, do you see how my hand moves? My fifth finger does not stay over that G because it doesn't have to. There's literally no point in doing that. If you are watching this video, if you've made it this far, and you're thinking, I don't know about that. I mean, maybe sometimes, but for a scale, something like that, it's probably not a big deal. I want you to experiment with this at home. And I think experimenting when it comes to playing the piano, when it comes to technique and these kinds of things, I think it's so, so important. So I invite you to experiment. When you go from one note to the next note, what you want to happen is your whole finger, hand, and arm, everything shifts to a new position, okay? Think about walking across a room. Your whole body is just shifting from one leg to the next leg. And I use that analogy a lot, but I think it's really helpful when it comes to playing the piano because that's kind of how we play, okay? We shift from one finger to the next, and you'll notice, okay, just that little bit of shifting across the keyboard from one finger to the next, rather than thinking of each individual little digit, is so incredibly helpful. One thing that I do with my students to help teach them this concept is I say that their arm should always be at a right angle to the keyboard. Okay, so we have this right angle here. And every note they play, the arm should shift one direction or the other. You'll notice some rotation there, but you'll also just notice how my arm just walks up the keyboard. So if you focus on that arm shifting and the hand, the fingers not extending except for when they need to. Obviously, there's sometimes that our hand has to extend, but as soon as it absolutely doesn't have to, we want to release it because otherwise we're going to get tight, we're going to get tense, it's going to limit our mobility at the keyboard, and it's going to cause an underlying amount of tension. So I hope that this makes sense. I hope that this was interesting and informative. If you have any questions, make sure and put those in the comments down below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.